On this month's Fashion Roundup, we're talking about why the French government is being called out for going back on their word, a much needed Shein update because it's truly hit the fan over there, why a brand is speaking out against the super popular B-Corp certification, and so much more, including news from Adidas, Team Vogue, and of course some much needed good news as well. So let's just get into it. Before we do, welcome back to my channel. I'm Katie. I talk a lot about sustainable fashion and do these monthly industry roundups so that if you're too lazy to keep up to date with everything happening in fashion, you can just watch this and kind of get the headlines. If that sounds good to you, then subscribe to me on YouTube, follow me on my other social media, and let's get into it. Starting with the French government being called out. Vestiaire Collective, a resale platform that made headlines in the past few years for banning fast fashion on their platform, is now asking why a landmark fast fashion bill that was introduced in French Parliament has been indefinitely delayed. France's anti-fast fashion bill, which passed unanimously back in March of 2024, has been stalled in the Senate for nearly a year now, with no confirmed timeline for further review. This prompted Vestiaire Collective to publish a video to their Instagram publicly challenging why progress has stalled when the bill was unanimously voted through when it was first introduced.
You know, at Vestiaire Collective, we've been fighting fast fashion for 3 years now, constantly lobbying the French government. But in just 2 months, Shein hired an ex-minister, Mr. Castaner, and in just 2 months, they managed to cancel the anti-fast fashion bill. Just like this. Pretty impressive, no? This is simply a national scandal. The bill was passed unanimously last year at the French Assembly. Why today are we letting Shein and Temu go unpunished with their crimes against the environment? We want answers, and we want that bill to go back on the agenda of the Senate right now.
Clearly, they're insinuating that Shein's hiring of a former French minister is a large part of the reason why the bill has been scrapped or stalled this long. And you can totally see the logic in that, since Shein would be massively impacted if this was to pass. The bill proposes penalties of up to €10 per garment by 2030 for companies producing a lot of cheap clothing, of which Shein is definitely one. It also proposes a ban on fast fashion advertising and mandatory transparency from brands on their repair, reuse, recycling, and environmental impacts. Now, the bill isn't perfect, and some people have spoken up to criticize its loose classification of what constitutes fast fashion, which could be a reason for it being delayed in Parliament this long as they try to grapple with that. But let's be honest, I think Vestiaire Collective are onto something with this hiring of a former French minister. If you live in France, Vestiaire Collective are asking you to help their campaign by emailing your minister, expressing your disappointment, and try to nudge this bill along in Parliament. Speaking of Shein, I promised a monster update, and honestly, there is a lot to go through for this section, so buckle up. Things have absolutely been falling apart lately. In an update to the parliamentary hearing that I covered here on this channel, Shein recently sent a letter to UK lawmakers outlining the details on its sourcing policies, supplier audits, and compliance measures, as they said they would in the hearing after they couldn't answer the questions in person. Although it was a pretty lengthy letter, UK lawmakers replied asking for even more clarification, specifically on whether Shein's US compliant cotton traceability measures apply to the UK also, and also requesting further information on the 2 child labour cases they found in their supply chain last year, which to me just kind of shows that UK lawmakers aren't backing down and are demanding the transparency that they should be. The threat of a Shein IPO has been hanging over us for almost 2 years now, I believe, but reports have just come in that it's been postponed again due to the avalanche of bad events Shein has recently gone through. One of which was a recent call to Sadiq Khan, London's mayor, by a prominent UK politician, demanding that Shein be banned from advertising on TfL services amid concerns over the company's human rights record. A few days after that, maybe in retaliation or maybe not, Shein announced that they'd abandoned plans to open a UK warehouse, which would have not only expanded their operations over here, but offered jobs and an economic boost. Although the timing of this announcement makes it seem like it's a threatening move if we continue to push away their IPO and question their policies, there's insider reports that this plan to abandon a UK warehouse was actually made in the middle of last year and was part of a broader review into Shein's logistical needs in Europe. But the timing of this is very off. Meanwhile, Trump's reversal of the de minimis rule has already caused Shein and Temu's US sales bills to drop. If you don't know what the de minimis drama is, then on the 1st of February, Trump issued an executive order, which not only imposed a 10% tariff on Chinese imports into the US, but also reversed the de minimis tax loophole, which means that parcels under $800 being imported from China would no longer be exempt from custom duties, which sent shockwaves throughout the fashion industry, but will heavily hit Shein and Temu, whose business model literally relies on this tax loophole to keep their costs low. Although Trump reissued the de minimis rule temporarily a couple of days later, whilst they sort out the logistics for collecting tax duties, the fashion industry is already scrambling to get systems in place for when it might be rebanned. And when it does, if Shein doesn't get something sorted out, then it's looking at a massive dent in its profits from its biggest market. Most likely due to this and the backlash around its ties to Chinese forced labor cotton, Shein has now reportedly started offering incentives to their Chinese suppliers to move operations to Vietnam, promising things like a 30% rise in procurement prices, larger orders, and extended lead times. But apparently their offer also states that it will only be for the first few months of their operations moving to Vietnam, after which these incentives will be revoked. This has literally all happened in the space of a few weeks, and judging by the fact that apparently Shein is considering cutting its valuation for its IPO by up to 25% in the wake of all of these events, I'd say they're pretty rattled. Honestly, it's looking kind of likely that they might just give up the idea of a UK IPO in the face of such resistance and also in the face of falling profits, which one can only hope for. But you can also help dissuade them even further by signing the petition expressing your desire to ban them from the UK stock exchange, which I'll link in the comments below. Okay, enough about Shein. Let's go on to Adidas. They recently announced a new line offering a premium elevated version of their products with an emphasis on craftsmanship. And my greenwashing senses are on alert. Apparently, this new line will offer premium versions of its classic superstar sneakers, Firebird tracksuit, and airliner bag, which they consider iconic archival pieces and want to reimagine in order to try grab a share of the luxury market. According to a press release, these newly designed items have been crafted using premium supple leathers with leading European ateliers, handmade and designed by working with the finest artisans in Italy. And although the word sustainability is not really mentioned anywhere in the press release as far as I could tell, it's definitely implied, and as you can probably tell, I have a few issues with this. Starting with the fact that they're really bigging up the fact that this is all handmade by artisans, as they put it, which I don't doubt, because actually all fashion is handmade. We don't currently have robots that are able to put together clothes. And this is true even for the polyester products that Adidas are continuing to churn out alongside this premium line. Just because one item is made in factories in Italy and one is made in a sweatshop somewhere doesn't mean that the other one isn't handmade too. To me, this feels like what COS or the premium collection is to H&M, a marketing ploy to distance themselves from fast fashion by saying they offer luxury items or a luxury line. But the items are still made by the same company, which continues to churn out relentless amounts of clothes and fuel the overconsumptive message of fashion. As I said, I do feel like this is greenwashing. I mean, why are they not focusing more on their main collection and improving the materials there, rather than splitting it off into a premium line and also a churn of polyester clothing? The same can be said for their craftsmanship and their working with skilled artisans. Why are they not introducing this in their main collection too? And overall, who is this for? Who is buying luxury Adidas? It just doesn't feel like there's a consumer out there. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not a market analyst, but like I can't envision a customer that would want a very expensive Adidas tracksuit because they promise it's been handmade in Italy. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is it greenwashing or is it not? Moving on, I wanted to talk about a great article by Sophie Benson for Vogue Business, which recently asked the question, are shareholders stalling sustainability progress? Basically, brands are putting those profits above any kind of progress towards sustainability in order to meet the demands of the people who have control of the company. The result of this is a corporate environment that ties ties their social and environmental responsibility to market performance and how well they can sell that to consumers, rather than the act of wanting to do good because it's good. And obviously, whilst this is true for many industries, fashion is especially susceptible because its message of overconsumption is so well aligned to the capitalist mantra of growth, as a quote from Dr. Andrea Werner puts it. I've spoken about this issue a little bit before on this channel, the fact that profit is being put over the planet. And it's not a new conversation, but I think it's really important that we do keep having it and we keep putting the blame for our increasing problems with climate change and lack of progress towards sustainability on the people who are responsible. Billionaires and shareholders are profiting off of unsustainable business practices and relentless capitalist growth, whilst hiding behind lines like "that's just business" or "this is the way it's always been done." That just simply isn't true. As the article points out, in 2016, 93% of US corporate profits went to shareholders, compared to less than 50% back in the 80s, which just shows that this wasn't always the way business was done. And the increasing greed of the few is getting worse and worse as the issues around our planet get worse and worse too. One of the most interesting parts of the article is that Sophie gave examples of brands that are trying to change this bias in their boardroom. The most famous example she gave is Patagonia, which transferred ownership from its founder to the planet via trust a few years ago and made waves while doing so. Other interesting examples were UK brand Faith and Nature and House of Hackney, a cosmetics and interiors company which have both legally appointed nature to their board of directors. This move basically means that a non-executive director has joined their board meetings and has started speaking and voting on behalf of the planet. I honestly thought this was so interesting. Like I said, the conversation is important, but I think it's important to highlight the ways that brands could be doing better, so they can't just hide behind ideas like "this is business" or "this is the only thing we can do," because clearly it's not. They're just choosing this path. Switching gears now, a brand is calling out B-Corp. And I'm not really that surprised. Dr. Bronner's, which is a skincare company, is dropping its B Corp certification from its packaging and its marketing and distancing itself from the certification scheme after it accused the label's lax standards of allowing some brands to greenwash under its name. I'm going to get into the details in a second, but I think this story is so important and we need to pay attention to what this brand on the inside is saying, considering that so many of us rely on a B Corp logo to make sustainable or what we think is sustainable purchasing decisions without really questioning it ourselves. If such a big certification scheme that consumers are relying on isn't what it appears to be, then it could be allowing greenwashing on a massive scale. Okay, so apparently Dr. Bronner's mainly takes issue with the fact that B Corp is increasingly allowing large multinational corporations to gain their certification, such as Nespresso and Nestle, and the fact that these businesses are not required to use third-party certifications on the human rights and environmental impacts of their supply chain, which they are making claims on in order to get this B Corp certification. Although B Corp does reward getting a third-party certification, brands without it can still gain enough points to be awarded that logo by scoring high in other assessment areas, which Dr. Bronner's alleges is allowing greenwashing. While smaller businesses do dominate the majority of B Corp brands, more and more multinationals are beginning to follow suit, and B Corp has faced many instances of backlash in the past few years because of this. For example, in 2022, the Nestle-owned coffee company Nespresso announced it had received a B Corp certification, which triggered an open letter signed by 30 members of the B Corp community protesting the certification and citing the history of child labour and wage theft on farms that grew Nespresso beans. In response to this news, B Corp have said that they remain committed to their mission, and it's been working to strengthen its standards, which will apparently result in new requirements being released in early 2025 that will reflect the changing landscape of sustainability. But I'm still not convinced, and as I said, I wasn't really surprised by this news. There's an ongoing issue with certification schemes used by brands to market sustainability to consumers, which is a distinct lack of oversight, a reliance on self-reporting from brands who obviously have the incentive to make themselves themselves look as sustainable as possible, and a deprioritization or gaps in these certification assessments around major issues like overproduction. And whilst I'm not putting this solely on B Corp, I do have a distrust of certification schemes and don't really let it sway me in my purchasing. So what I'd say is that if you're someone who does rely on the B Corp logo when you're shopping, maybe do a little bit of extra research about the company alongside this. Okay, we're on to the good news section of the video now, which is my favorite. I feel like we always need good news, especially after some of those stories. And we're kicking it off with the news that Teen Vogue is now actively pushing sustainability to their 4.3 million Instagram followers, 1.9 million TikTok viewers, and 4.6 million monthly website viewers, which is a huge readership and a huge step forward, especially since people have been praising Teen Vogue's reporting lately and they've had a lot of eyes on them. If you're confused by what they mean about actively pushing sustainability, they've laid out some guidelines about what this will mean for their editorial coverage, including monthly articles about the importance of preserving our wardrobes and how to do this, including secondhand or upcycled options in their shopping guides, and prioritizing fashion stories around impacted communities, women, and girls. I think the fact that a major publication is publicly declaring that they are taking responsibility for the editorial coverage they put out and trying to make it as sustainable as possible is a massive step forward. And hopefully it will be so popular that other brands follow in their wake. Okay, next piece of good news is that a brand is actually investing in circular technology. And of course it's Ganni. Ambercycle, a polyester recycler, has teamed up with Ganni for a 4-year deal that will replace over 20% of Ganni's annual virgin and bottle recycled polyester with Cycora, a recycled polyester derived from textiles instead. Obviously, polyester isn't the most sustainable textile, but we have a lot of it on this planet, and currently a massive lack of infrastructure to recycle polyester clothing in order to use it again. And Ganni signing on to a 4-year commitment with a brand trying to bridge the gap in this infrastructure is a major deal. Okay, every time I do these news headlines, I feel like I have new legislation to announce, which is really, really good. And this time we're going over to California, which has just announced its sustainable fashion legislation that mimics the New York Fashion Act that was announced a while ago. Basically, the new Fashion Environmental Accountability Act of 2025 is being introduced in California. Very similar to the New York Fashion Act. If passed, brands making $100 million and up and selling in California will need to set science-based emission reduction targets, manage toxic chemicals across their supply chain, and prove their compliance or face penalties of up to 2% of their global revenue. Like I said, so much legislation is being introduced, it almost feels continuous at this point, and the meaning of it can kind of get lost in the onslaught of new laws. But just the fact that New York, which is a major fashion player, and California, which is the 3rd largest state in the US, both introduced these new laws, shows that their combined impact could be massive. And finally, to sum up, let's look at some good climate news, not just limited to fashion, which I think could be good for all of us to hear today. According to this post, green energy prices have dropped globally. The Rosebank oil field was stopped in the UK. Spain and France signed the Global Oceans Treaty into law. A Montana court supported youth activists fighting polluting companies, and Client Earth is winning international climate cases, including in Poland and Italy. And with that, I feel like this is a good place to end the video on a high note. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know any and all of your thoughts on any and all of the stories I've covered in the comments below. If you did like this video, then make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and say hi on all my other social media pages. And yeah, I hope you have a lovely day. If you want to watch another video, then YouTube thinks you'll like the one on screen now, but otherwise I'll speak to you soon. Bye.